Gentlemen, as we move forward into the next discussion, we will underscore where we are in terms of progress in achieving all those essentials and ensuring that Malaysia becomes a global nation of choice when it comes to investment for projects and businesses which are climate resilient in their own right. So on that note, this session will underscore the importance of collaborative effort in enhancing Malaysia's climate resilience and will highlight the necessary ingredients that we need for integrated action among government, private sector, civil society, and local communities to effectively address the climate challenge. The goal is to inspire collective action and to emphasize the critical role of a unified Malaysia in building resilience and a capacity for thriving amid climate-related impacts. So on that, on that note, it is my pleasure to now invite our moderator, Mr. Feroz Nada, Executive Director of UN Global Compact Network, Malaysia and Brunei, to kindly take the stage as our moderator for this session. And I'd also like to invite our panelists, Mr. Wan Sayuti bin Wan Hussein, Senior General Manager, Corporate Sustainability Office, Petronas. Mr. Wan Sayuti's office is responsible for driving energy transition towards net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Also, I'd like to invite Ms. Farhana Shuko, Malaysia Youth Delegation, Loss and Damage, Developing Climate Policies that Fit Future Generations. She's a loss and damage finance enthusiast and co-founder of Bumi, a startup focusing on facilitating climate action. We also have Yang Berhormat, Dato' Dr. Hazland Abang Hipni, Deputy Minister, Ministry of Energy and Environment, Sustainability with the State of Sarawak. And his ministry's focus, is on local actions addressing climate change within the State of Sarawak. And finally, rounding up the panel, we have Yang Berusa Dr. Hartini Momanase, Under Secretary, Climate Change Division, NRES. She leads the development of Malaysia's roadmap towards single-use plastics 2018-2030 and is one of the champions for climate resilience within the ministry. So on that note, I would like to now hand the session over to our moderator, Mr. Feroz, to kindly take charge of the conversation. And as usual, you may chime in via the QR codes which will be flashing on the screen from time to time. Over to you, Mr. Feroz.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum and good morning, everyone. So when we had this panel briefing, we were told that, keep the discussion informal, kita santai sikit lah, so to engage on this. So I think that's the energy that we will look to do today. But I thought I'll just start off to wake up the room a bit, right? Very quiet room, right? So we want to ask some questions to the audience. How many of you are involved in climate action work? How many of you all feel you're impacted by climate change? How many of you all are climate deniers? So, right, okay. So, 5 years ago, I had the opportunity to actually ask a question to His Excellency Ban Ki-moon, who actually introduced the SDGs during his tenure as the UN Sec Gen. I asked him, sir, which is the most important of the 17 goals for you? And he actually said, goal 13, climate. And I asked, why? He said, because if we are unable to talk about adaptation and mitigation for climate, then everything else will go down with it. So I think today's discussion is very pertinent, very important, and we are joined with, I think 4 power pack and also very experienced panelists on this. And the structure of this, each panelist will be having a 5-minute opening remarks on various topics on climate change. And then we'll go into a panel discussion. And don't worry, there's also opportunity for you to ask the panelists. And I really urge you to take this opportunity because not often you'll get a power pack panel like this. I think there's QR codes that you can post your question. And I will do my best to ensure as many of your questions rather than my questions being asked to the panelists. So we just a quick introduction. Again, we are joined here by Mr. Wan Sayuti, who is the Senior General Manager, Corporate Sustainability Office of Petronas. Very important actor here for us for climate action. We have Cik Farhana Shuko, the Malaysian Youth Delegation. I think very important to take the voices of the youth, right? Because this is the issue of your time, as perhaps more than our time on this. We also have Yang Berusaha Dr. Hartini, Muhammad Nasir, Under Secretary for Climate Change Division NRES, very important actor to push this, and also YB Datuk Dr. Hazland, Abang Hipni, who's a Deputy Minister, Ministry of Energy and Environmental Sustainability Sarawak, METSI, right? And and Sarawak, MESTI, and I know Sarawak is always seen as a leader in this space, so we'll be able to hear your thoughts as well, sir. So to kick this off, I thought I will take a national, state, corporate, and future perspective, right? So if I could invite Yang Berusaha Dr. Hartini to maybe share your opening remarks first to take us off. Doctor, over to you.
Thank you. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And a very good morning to all of you. Actually, it's my honor to share a bit about government's perspective at this session of climate resilience today. And as we gather here today, we know that the global community is at a critical juncture. Climate change is no longer a distant threat, but it is a reality that we have to face daily, like sea levels, more frequent floods, and yesterday I heard that there is also flood in the northern part of Malaysia. And also we have experienced increasing droughts, but this daily threaten our economic stability, public health, and overall well-being. So these challenges demand swift, coordinated action across all sectors of society. And Malaysia, we are placing climate resilience at the core of our national development strategy to protect our future. And also, I think Yang Berbahagia Datuk Deputy Secretary General also has mentioned about 6th assessment report of IPCC, and I just want to highlight a bit that the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events in Malaysia is about proactively adapting. Then Malaysia is about proactively adapting these challenges by safeguarding essential infrastructure, ensuring food and water security, and strengthening public health strategies. This is not a merely environmental issue, but this is a national security issue. Our commitment is to build a more inclusive and resilient society, where even our most vulnerable populations are protected from climate risk. Datuk juga has mentioned about the collaboration with the private and also NGOs. We have the panel that has been inspired by our Yang Berhormat Menteri, the advisory and also consultative panel. We meet them quite often, like we also meet them on issues like COP, climate, NDC, to update NDC, our NDC roadmap, and so on and so forth. So we acknowledge that the private sectors also play a critical role, and also the NGOs, so in driving technological advancements, and also how to contribute invaluable insight into regional vulnerabilities. And then we also is developing few roadmap and also policies now. Like mentioned also, we have MyNap. We are going to start very soon. And Nationally Determined Contribution Roadmap and Action Plan. And also LTLED is also in the process of getting the climate cabinet decision. And also National Disaster Management Agency, NAMA, is also developing the Disaster Risk Reduction, DRR Policy 2024-2030, that will strengthen our preparedness for climate-related disasters. So we also incentivize private sectors for climate action. For example, we have GTFS, Green Technology Financial Scheme, that is also handled by MGTC, Kita Gite by MIDA. This is all to encourage businesses to adopt green technologies. And public-private partnership is also important, like project like Smart Tunnel project in Kuala Lumpur that have saved the city the financial burden of potential damage by reducing flood risk. And this is a clear example on how innovation can lead to practical and life-saving solutions. Like I mentioned, that we have also engaged with local communities and civil society. There is a program by NAPMA that giving initiatives for local leaders and NGOs that equip them with the knowledge and tools to build climate resilience from the ground up. And also we are developing RUPIN, National Climate Change Act, Rang Undang-Undang Perubahan Bina Negara, and we are now in the process of updating our NDC 3.0 that we are going to submit in February 2025. Other than that, I think maybe I stop here. I can pass to Mr. Wan Saiti. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Perhaps we can move on to YB Dato. Dr. Hazland, if you would like to share your opening remarks, sir.
Thank you very much, Farus. Assalamualaikum. Very good morning. Here's my slides.
The slides coming up.
Coming up. Sarawak's approach is slightly different, yeah, because ours is a more straightforward approach.
Can we pull up
We
the slides?
approach climate change as a challenge which requires solutions. So we call it climate solutions. And climate solutions can be easily divided into two ways. One is nature-based solution, which Sarawak has and Malaysia also have, which is through the forests, through the peat, and also blue carbon. And our carbon sink in Sarawak alone, rough estimation is about 750 million tons to about 1 billion tons. That is without the blue carbon in the ocean. So that is nature-based solution. The other solution is technical-based solution. Okay, technical-based solution, which is made up of the 8 different energies that Sarawak has, starting from hydroelectricity, which is actually the turning point if we would like to contribute in the mitigation of climate change. It is hydropower. Second is solar. Third is wind. Fourth is maybe wave energy, which Sarawak has. We have all those 4 green energies in Sarawak, especially hydro. And also we have the derivatives of the green energies, which is hydrogen, and I will speak more on hydrogen. We also have bioenergy, and we have 3 biomass for bioenergy, which is number 1, oil palm waste, number 2 is microalgae, and number 3 is wood and bamboo pellets. And then next we have synthetic energy, which we have developed in Bintulu through our methanol plant. Yeah, methanol plant in Bintulu. And of course, the last energy is still oil and gas energy. Oil and gas is still there. We require liquefied natural gas for the next 10 to 15 years in our transition towards a fully green energy and green economy. So, besides that, Sarawak has the strengths. Before we embark in this green initiative, we must realize what are our strengths. So our strength, as I mentioned just now, is our huge land mass and our huge forest. 62% of that land mass is covered by forests. And we also have a lot of rivers whereby we can construct huge hydroelectric dams. Now we have 4 hydroelectric dams, which can generate about 5,400 megawatts, of course with a combination of a bit of coal and a bit of oil and gas, LNG and so on. And we are going to upscale our power to about 10,000, at least 10,000 megawatts by 2030 through various means, for example, floating solar, cascading dam, palm hydro, and so on. And also we have our visionary and brave leadership in our Right Honourable Premier, who is the person behind all this. We are just doing the detailing of the ideas and strategies of the Premier. And we have political stability, and of course, the whole thing is based on one strategy, one economic strategy, and Sarawak somehow or other came up with this strategy, which is called the PCDS 2030, Post-COVID Development Strategy 2030, which has 3 pillars, that is social inclusivity, economic development, and environmental sustainability. And if Sarawak were to follow these strategies closely by 2030, we are able to double our GDP. We are able to double our GDP through the new revenues that we can create. And our GDP will be about 282 billion. Yeah, I think enough for now. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, YB. Syed, can I maybe move to you to give you Petronas perspective?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum and a very good morning. Petronas celebrated its 50th anniversary recently since Petronas establishment in 1974. So I think we recognize that in the last 50 years, what we have achieved will or may not take us to the future, right? So in 2022, we can move to the next slide, or do I have? So in 2022, Petronas launched is what we call energy transition strategy. I think we recognize the fast pace of energy transitions. In fact, the International Energy Agency, IEA, reported that this year, 2024, the investment in energy will exceed 3 trillion, right? And the investment in clean and green energy is about 2 trillion, so double than the investment in fossil fuel-based technology or investment. So we recognize that moving forward, I think we need to build resilience in our portfolio, addressing the challenge and also opportunities that climate risk present itself. So we have this core business. How do we provide more energy with less emission? Because we recognize that Malaysia, in many developing economies, still very much depending on fossil fuel, but we need to tackle the emissions that come out from that. So how do we deliver more energy to cater for the demand, but with less emission? So this is where the technology, Dr. Hazland mentioned about CCS, for example, tech-based technology has to come into place. The second pillar is about capturing new growth opportunity. So for us, this is where we need to start doubling down into new technology investment. You've heard about Gentari. 2022, we launched Gentari to go big into solar PV, hydrogens, and also green mobility. Petronas also heavily invested in biofuel. SAF, we announced the biorefinery project in Pengerang to produce SAF. We're also investing in advanced materials and nature-based solutions. And the last bit is about how do we align our portfolio towards the climate pathway of 1.5 to 2 degrees C. We have our own aspiration to get to net zero carbon emission by 2050. So we've developed and also published the targets 2030 to reduce our absolute emission by 25%, scope 1, scope 2. We also published for this year alone to cap our emission in Malaysia to 49.5 degrees C. So that's the three components that makes Petronas energy transition strategy to build resilience in our portfolio moving forward. If you look at sustainability, the way we approach sustainability, there are three components to it. Delivering net zero, the pathway that I've just mentioned. We also recognize that Malaysia, with our mega diverse offerings of forests, marine, we also need to invest in nature. So thriving with nature is another component that Petronas have developed and crafted. And here we also launched our nature and biodiversity position in 2022. So we recognize that climate and nature need to come together because these are intertwined challenges that need to be solved together. And the last piece there is fostering a just transition. It's about putting people at the heart of the energy transition. How do we make sure that the skills, the workforce of the future in Malaysia ecosystem is ready to take on the new opportunities and challenges? And Petronas embraced all 17 SDG goals, but we prioritize 7 that has the most direct material impact to our business and operation. This including SDG 7, SDG 13, climate actions. If we look at Petronas, how do we go about net zero carbon emission by 2050? There are 2 big components to it, right? The first one is about reducing our greenhouse gas emission. So we have crafted these 4 emission reduction lever, zero routine flaring and venting. Petronas signed up to the World Bank zero routine flaring, and also making sure that our practices internally are following international standards. We also signed up to the Oil and Gas Methane Partnership 2.0, OGMP. We have our energy efficiency program. This is also to support the ECA in Malaysia. Electrification is something that we assess continuously, opportunity to replace some of the assets or facilities to electrify some of the equipment, and carbon capture and storage. We've announced our partnership with the state as well, Sarawak Carbon Capture and Storage Mentulu, and also other opportunities in Malaysia. And the other part is the opportunities. We must make sure and recognize that we capture the opportunities in the energy transition. How do we supply lower carbon, cleaner and greener solutions? So some of these ventures, new investment that Petronas is investing in, renewable energy, specialty chemical, biofuels, and including nature-based solution. That's on the emission side, building resilience through emission reductions and also capturing new growth opportunities. But not to forget the nature element. I mentioned about thriving with nature. Petronas' aspiration to make sure that our efforts to conserve, preserve environmental efforts through yayasan and also through nature-based solution investments also contributes to the adaptation plan of our own assets and also to the country. We also launched this Just Transition Roundtable series last year because we know that we need to put people at the heart of energy transitions. So what are some of the key concerns from the key stakeholders, from our own supply chain, our own workforce, and also the communities? So this is the report that we published in November 2023, capturing the insights, some of the key expectations and concern from the various stakeholders, because we know that we can only move forward if we have the stakeholders with us in this journey. Thank you, Faraz.
Thank you, Wan. Farhana, your thoughts?
Assalamualaikum and good morning, everyone. So I'll be covering a bit on loss and damage. And so I think before I can even talk about loss and damage, I must first share maybe 2 definitions on 2 terms. Yeah. So for example, so the first one is mitigation. So mitigation is there are efforts to reduce emissions to limit global temperature rise, while adaptation are efforts to adapt to a changing climate. So loss and damage are climate change impacts that cannot be mitigated and adapted. And so loss and damage, mitigation, and adaptation, they make up the 3 pillars of climate action. And they're not mutually exclusive because one cannot exist without the other. So you have to mitigate first, and what you cannot mitigate, you adapt. And what you cannot adapt then becomes loss and damage. And even the concepts of loss and damage are related, but they're also different. So loss refers to things that are lost forever and that cannot be retrieved, such as lives, biodiversity losses, while damage refers to things that are damaged but that can be restored, such as infrastructure. And generally, there are 2 types of loss and damage, which are economic and non-economic losses. And these losses are caused by 2 events, which the panelists have also shared, which are extreme weather events, such as heavy rain, and slow onset events, such as sea level rise. And on the ground, generally, loss and damage is paid by people and communities who, more often than not, are not properly compensated for the losses that they experience, such as livelihoods, housing, even in a wider sense, the ecosystem at large, where they maybe that's where the source of food is, and even maybe their source of livelihoods most of the time attached to. And so in Malaysia, affected communities depend on government aid, which is not enough, and this approach is not sustainable considering that floods are occurring at an increasing rate. And Malaysia is vulnerable towards climate change, and it will grow over time, opening up further risk of losses and damages. Ultimately, loss and damage is a climate justice issue, in my opinion, and loss and damage affects many communities every year. But it is often missing from the conversations on how we deal with climate change. And loss and damage disproportionately affects people in the global south, i.e. people in developing and least developed countries, who often already lack resources to deal with climate change impacts. And unfortunately, there's no earmark funding for loss and damage yet. And just FYI, the Loss and Damage Fund just started to operationalize at COP28 last year. And if I can give like an image, it's basically, we have pledges so far, but we don't really have a fund. We don't even have a pocket per se to put the money in. So that's where we're at right now. And the ones who are taking the brunt of it to respond to these losses and damages on the front lines are actually underfunded humanitarian sector. And so the state of growing the state of growing inequality in the world is due to the past and present colonialism, as well as the exploitation of working people by the wealthy. And loss and damage disproportionately impact poor and marginalized communities, furthering inequities and inequalities. And people bearing the burden of loss and damage the least to cause it. So all in all, at the international negotiations, loss and damage matters are an ongoing issue, an ongoing debate. And regardless of the outcome, Malaysia ought to have strategies on how to address loss and damage at home. Thank you.
Thank you, Farhana. So we've heard the opening remarks of each panelist, so I thought I'll go a little bit off script and not ask you the questions that was prepared. Just following up on your initial opening remarks. Maybe we can start with you, Doctor, right? As you mentioned, there is certain legislation coming to place, the Climate Change Act, I think the upcoming Climate Change Policy 2.0 and all. How do you think these changing legislations will impact and affect us normal Malaysians? On this, some comments on that?
First, on the national policy on climate change, we have the first version in 2009. That one is before Paris Agreement. So now we are updating the national policy to take into account all the recent development internationally and domestically. So the second one, the Rupin, Rang Undang-Undang Perubahan Iklim, we never had any act for climate change before. So we are now developing one. So some of the key areas that we are looking is on the, to give power to the minister on certain aspects, like to put certain targets on carbon emissions, to implement programs like a domestic emission trading scheme, and also for reporting. So that is the thing that we are thinking now.
Thank you. Can I just ask the organizers to flash the AHA QR code again? So while I'm doing my first round of questions, I'll ask everybody to also input your questions and make my life easier as a moderator as well on this. Maybe I move on to YB Datuk Dr. Hazland, right? You are a big clicker. So, Doctor, I know I've always been a big fan of the way Sarawak Energy, Sarawak is pushing sustainability, right? But just a following up from your earlier sharing, I really tertarik when you say Sarawak looks at it as climate solutions, right? But this also, I suppose, will need a whole of government push to do. So perhaps if I could just get your opinion on how is MESTI working with other government agencies and ministries within Sarawak to push this climate agenda as well?
Thank you, Farus. My slides, please. Just this one is a very important slide. This is how we prepare ourselves before we embark into any green initiative. There are 4 frameworks that we need to prepare. 4. Number 1 is the legal framework. The legal framework, which we don't have. Malaysia doesn't have any legal framework yet. So Sarawak has done the initiative about 2.5 years ago when my ministry was formed, and we developed and amended the land code, which will enable CCUS to be carried out, in our offshore. Sarawak has 1,665 depleted oil wells offshore with a potential storage capacity of about 9 billion tons. And also we have the natural saline aquifer in our offshore, which has a potential capacity, storage capacity of 3 trillion tons. So you just imagine the amount of new revenue that we can generate together with Malaysia and with Petronas, of course, and Petros. So the second framework, on the legal framework, we also have already come up with our environmental bill last November in our Dune sitting, whereby one of the important ordinance that we have passed is the carbon levy. The carbon levy, which Malaysia doesn't have. Only Singapore has got carbon tax, but we don't call it carbon tax. We call it at the state level is carbon levy. Basically, it is to tax the heavy emitters if they exceed a certain threshold of CO2 emission, right? But of course, this will be an initial stage, and we will not be charging them a very high amount. And also we'll be giving them a grace period of about 3 years to 5 years, which is according to the international standard. And the second framework that we need to prepare before we embark is the technical framework. So for technical framework, it is not that difficult because Malaysia already has that technical framework. For example, our oil and gas is very good, it's world class. And in Sarawak, we have our Sarawak Energy Berhad, which is a specialist in dam construction and also in hydroelectric and now floating solar. So the other half of the technical collaboration that we need is international technical collaborators. For example, established companies from Japan, like Samsung, whereby we have collaborated with them to develop our first hydrogen plant in Bintulu by 2030, and also with Samsung Korea, whereby we are also going to have another hydrogen plant in Bintulu, which will produce about a total of 240,000 tons of hydrogen per year. And just imagine the amount of revenue that we can obtain from that. So technical is not a problem for Malaysia and for Sarawak. The third framework, which is quite challenging, is the financial, business and economy framework, which I think was mentioned by our speaker just now. About funding. So for Sarawak, since we have been in this aggressive business of green economy and so on for the last 2.5 years, now the banks are coming to us. We don't even have to go to the banks. The banks are coming to us. And also the other investors, even from Middle East, they're coming with us with grants, of huge grants, 5B, and also like the hydrogen industry is about 5B per plant. So you can just imagine, even our CCUS, we have got investors waiting for us, and our first injection for CCUS will be by 2026 between Petros and Petronas at Kasawari, and after that will be a lot more injection. So financial now is quite settled for Sarawak. It's quite settled. And the last framework, which also was mentioned just now by our youth speaker, is our human resource, talent development, and awareness framework. That is very important. So Sarawak is developing our own talent, our own technicians for the hydrogen industry and also for the CCUS industry. And even one of our universities, Sarawak ada 5 university, we have 5 universities private in Sarawak. One of the universities, which is Curtin University in Miri, has developed a new course in this part of the world, which is called the Bachelor of Energy Engineering. That's the first time in this part of the world, which includes all the 8 or 9 energies and even CCUS. Yeah, it is a 4 years course, and the first batch has started this year of about almost 40 students. Yeah? So that is the frameworks, the 4 frameworks, very, very important frameworks that we must prepare before we embark into our green initiative. And of course, from this, Sarawak has developed our own energy transition policy, which is quite different from NETR. So it is based basically on our 8 energies that we have, including CCUS, and also the enablers, which I just mentioned just now, the 4 or 5 frameworks. Yeah, thank you very much.
Very inspiring, YB. So you've already got your strategy, your talent, and also the finance bit involved. Very interesting. In your sharing, you mentioned just transition. I think that's a very important discourse when you talk about climate actions. Perhaps you could like to share, some of your Petronas's experience in the conversation of just transition, some challenges that you face, and how you plan to overcome them.
All right, thank you, Faraz. I think last year when we first started this Just Transition Roundtable series, you also participated in one of the series. We need to coin a program from the stakeholders' perspective. So we don't know what we don't know. So when we discuss internally, we need to have an engagement and gauge the level of, I guess, readiness and also concerns from the key stakeholders. So I take from the value chain ecosystem, right? Petronas, in our book, we have more than 4,000 vendors and suppliers, right? And 90% of those are from SME, small, medium enterprises. And they don't necessarily have exposure overseas. I mean, if you go and have operation in Europe or other parts of the world, you may have been exposed to a stricter regulatory requirements or disclosure or in ESG reporting, right? But in our vendors and suppliers ecosystem, most of them operate in Malaysia. And we know that Malaysia still, we don't have that regulatory pressure yet, except for those that are listed company under the Bursa framework. So when we engage them, one of the key concerns is on capability, right? Really understanding the space and how do they develop their own internal program for MRV, start to really monitoring, reporting, and verifying their emission data in accordance to the GHG protocol, international standards. The very first one. And it's always a competing resource between putting people to drive more business and putting resources to drive ESG. So it's a competing priority. So capability and capacity. And number two is about financing. Hazland mentioned about Sarawak have many bankable projects, but for our value chain players, SME especially, they struggle even to get financing. They also recognize that even to get ESG financing, there are thicker reporting requirements that they need to answer to the banks. So after listening to all these concerns, I think last month Petronas launched what we call PSSP, Petronas Supplier Support Program. So this is really about addressing the key concern from capacity building, from reporting, and also financing, linking them to the banks. So that's one of the examples, right, on addressing supply chain capacity and also preparing them to build climate resilience moving forward. And Petronas, through our group procurement, has been engaging. Since 2021, we have like a 101 ESG masterclass, continuing that with, we also bring in external speakers just to shed light what are some of the best practices that we see. On our own employees, we know that some of the key projects like CCS, even hydrogen, that mega project requires the technical capacity and capability that we already have in-house. If you are PE, petroleum engineers, to transition to be a CCS project engineer or project manager, you already have 80% of the base skill. What we need just to upskill another maybe 20% on the infrastructure, pipeline and so on, right? So it's important for a company like Petronas start to develop strategic workforce planning to anticipate what are the future requirements based on the opportunities that we see. CCS, hydrogens, biofuels. Biorefinery is a refinery. So we have been operating refinery for more than 50 years. So how do we use that base capability, now transition or rescale a portion of it to cater for the new industry? So that we've been doing, getting the key concern and also design programs based on the feedback that we have received from the stakeholders.
Thank you, Wan. So, how do you also engage your supply chain and all of that? Suppose now you can send more people to Sarawak to be energy engineers, right? Well, very interesting. Farhana, you brought up a very interesting word, which is climate justice. Perhaps I could get your opinion, especially from the perspective of the youth. What is the aspiration of Malaysian youth and their expectations when they talk about climate resilience for the country?
I think I can speak maybe from my own experience, and I think to also to explain first, like what is climate resilience, right? Understanding, based on understanding, and to me, it's the ability to anticipate and respond to climate change. And I mean, linking back to loss and damage, it is part of avoiding loss and damage by implementing adaptation efforts, because that's what we need to do right now. And adaptation becomes loss and damage when it reaches a breaking point. Because I think going back to like the link I explained about mitigation leading to adaptation, which will lead to loss and damage. And because the breaking point is when adaptation doesn't work anymore. And when loss and damage due to climate change, for instance, infrastructure, right? It does impact not just housing, it will actually impact economic stability over time. So climate resilience it's sort of like a more holistic approach, and I think it's something that we should take a bit more seriously.
Thank you. I wonder if there's questions from the audience already. Is there any questions? Not yet? Sorry, we need to pass it to the slides, through the QR or this part. Any question? Okay. Okay, maybe we take the first question there. So climate action is well articulated in our mitigation plan ongoing, but how do we expedite the adaptation for Malaysian public in facing the impact of climate change? So this is a question on the adaptation part. Perhaps an open question to all the panelists. What are your thoughts and how do we face adaptation issues when it comes to climate change impact? Doctor, maybe you want to start first?
Okay, like mentioned earlier, we are now developing our Malaysian National Adaptation Plan. We are focusing to 5 areas: public health, agriculture and food security, forestry and biodiversity, water resources and security, and infrastructure and cities. So we start to engage with civil society and also stakeholders, and we also have done few webinars to enhance awareness to public about the heat, about the height in temperature. And also we are going to have another webinar this coming, I think 20th, if I'm not mistaken. So that is how we try to engage the public, to make them aware what they have to face, and what are the adaptation that they have to prepare themselves, especially when the weather the temperature is increased. So the National Adaptation Plan will only be ready in 2026. So we are now, we already got the approval from GCF for the money to come. And also, we are also setting the engagement first. And we also have Nahrim, the agency under Petra, to help us to develop the plan.
Thank you. Anyone else would like that? Doctor?
Can
Dr.
I
Hazland?
have my slide on the, humans are humans. To adapt, there must be an incentive. Yeah, it is a carrot and stick approach. We must use the carrot and stick approach. Yeah, so that's why Sarawak has come up with our green economy policy. Oh, it's not here. Our green economy policy. Yeah? We have developed our green economy policy, and it was launched last year. It is based on simply a low carbon economy. Low carbon economy. And it is spread out into all the sectors, the business sectors. Example, land use. It has got something to do with land use. It has got something with the trees there. It has got something to do with the pit. And all this can generate income for the public. Yeah? For example, if someone has got a huge piece of land with a lot of trees there, they can go into carbon trading through carbon credits. And in Sarawak, the size of Sarawak is so huge. It is as big as West Malaysia. And we have got 62% forests. And in our law, the legal framework, our laws has mentioned that anybody with alienated land can apply for permits and licensing to go into carbon trading. Okay? The only challenge now is that in Malaysia and in this part of the world, in ASEAN, we do not have the emission trading system yet. Yeah, we don't have the ETS yet. So our only method of carbon trading is through the voluntary carbon market, which the price is slightly a bit lower. Actually, it's about half the price through compliance market. So next year, Malaysia will be the host for the ASEAN Summit. I think this is the best opportunity for us to propose our own ETS, at least for this part of the world, which is ASEAN, or in collaboration with Asia Pacific. That is part of the collaboration. Yeah? That is a huge collaboration. So that is on the land. Let's say on the transportation, yeah, we have got another pillar, that is transportation. Sarawak, as you know, we are already embarking in our hydrogen-powered autonomous rapid transport, our ART, our tram, which is hydrogen-powered. That will create extra revenue for those downstream, for the technicians, for the suppliers, vendors, and so on. There's a lot. And also our fleet, our government fleet, will be slowly converted into hydrogen-powered vehicles. And of course, the normal battery EV is up to you. You are looking at what is happening to the battery EV industry and so on. That is up to you. But for Sarawak, our government policy is towards hydrogen FCEV. Okay, that alone has created a lot of opportunities and revenues, employment, and so on. Yeah. So of course, the stick, we have the laws, and we have already approved our carbon levy. So whether you like it or not, you have to comply to the law, yeah, because humans are humans, yeah. And also, we are going to develop a new policy, which is called the WTE policy, Waste to Energy policy, yeah, because through our waste, we can create energy. For example, it is so difficult to train humans to segregate their waste. So now there is already a technique whereby you don't have to segregate the waste. You can put all the waste that you have into a machine, an incinerator, that will incinerate all the waste except steel, concrete, and so on. And you can produce steam, which will turn the turbine and can produce energy. In Sarawak, we'll be doing that soon. We are now developing our policy. And for example, our own municipal waste in Kuching alone, we are producing about 700 tons per day of waste. We can produce 70 megawatts from 700 tons. And Sarawak is producing about 2,000 tons per day of municipal waste only, minus the agricultural waste and so on. So there's a huge opportunity and adaptation strategies that all of us can go into. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hazland. Very pragmatic carrot and stick, and also how technology can support this. One, I don't know if you have something.
Yeah. So for corporates, it's really important to translate the framework into actions, right? And for Petronas and many of our listed co, we have pledged adherence to the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, TCFD. And what it means is that we have to do the physical risk and also adaptation assessment for all our assets. And for Petronas, our assets are either offshore or near to the coast area, which is very susceptible to the climate hazards. So we have embarked in this journey doing the physical risk and adaptation assessment for all of our assets, and now identify which are the high risk, very high risk, and also extreme risk assets. And for those that classify under the three categories, go to the sites and develop the adaptation plan. And this is, I think it's no longer a voluntary. I think if you are Petronas or any oil and gas or extractive industries, this expectation from the markets to show what is your physical risk and adaptation plan for the assets. Besides TCFD, we also do our nature-based climate solutions, exploring opportunities in NBS, either terrestrial forests or also marine or blue carbon, looking at opportunities to also address adaptation, especially when it comes to coastal areas. And through our efforts in Yayasan Petronas, we also embark on several environmental efforts, tree plantings, mangrove rehabilitations, and all this contributing also to adaptation. So TCFD, our nature-based climate solutions, and also the environmental efforts to the Yayasan Petronas, all the efforts to translate from framework into actions on the ground.
Thank you, Wan. Farhana, I don't know if you'd like to add anything to that question. How do we look at adaptation better?
I mean, we can start with a needs assessment, right? Because I think learning from what's happened in mitigation is that there's an overemphasis in certain industries and at the fault of others, for example. So like if you look at the climate policy initiative, they released for the global climate finance landscape in 2021 to 2022, they looked at the fact that in terms of financing, 91% of global climate finance flows goes towards just mitigation, only 5% in adaptation. And within that mitigation financing, they realized that majority has gone into energy sector, but very little has gone to agriculture. And I know as much as energy security is important to us, but so is food security. So I think, yeah, it needs assessment. And I think I just recently learned that we don't really, I'm not sure if it's this true, but basically Malaysia doesn't really have an official climate risk assessment. And so we do need a regular risk assessment as well for Malaysia, and also just to really, for us to understand what is it that we need to adapt and why we need to adapt those different areas and sectors. That's it.
I think you brought, sorry, you want to add on that?
Just to add to that, we did recently benchmarking to look at companies or corporates that have declared their climate mitigation efforts, right? Among those, only 1 out of 5 have adaptation plan. So meaning that a lot of efforts are gearing towards mitigation now. We do see movements in adaptation, but the reality is only 20% have adaptation plan at the moment. Right? Yeah.
Thank you. So I see there's a lot of questions. That's very good. There's a lot of interest in the crowd, but I'm going to use my moderator privilege to ask a question that I want to ask first. Okay. I think a lot of good discussions about adaptation and looking at, I think, Farhana, you brought up the fact that we have to do a baseline and look at different perspectives as well. And one of the key tenets of the 17 goals is actually leaving no one behind. So when we talk about climate resilience, how can we ensure the voices of marginalized and vulnerable communities are also included in this whole discourse and planning and strategizing about climate action in Malaysia? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, for starters, you can invite them to this kind of panels. But also, I think it's including them in the conversation, but it's also meeting them halfway. Because I think from experience, I benefited a lot from the mentorship and even from the guidance from different stakeholders who taught me that, okay, if you want to have these discussions at this level, this is what you need to do, follow the process. You need to let us know what the process is. And so then in a way, we can have beneficial conversations. And we can at least speak in a way that where both sides are being heard. And so I think first thing is for someone to invite them to speak, but also to kind of guide them through the process.
Yeah, so just advocacy and engaging as a starting point, yeah, on this.
Yeah, mutual respect.
That's nice. Okay, that's great. To Dr. Hartini, Dr. Hazland, and Wan, I'm sure in your engagement of climate, there's a lot of top-line strategic discussions and discourse, a lot of acronyms, right? They may be lost in many of the other, actors in climate action. So, an open question to three of you. How do we talk about localizing climate action more so that more people understand this at a basic level and they are also inspired to take climate action themselves? So how do we talk about SDG localization when it comes to climate actions? Maybe we go with you one first on this here.
Thank you for us. I think Farhana also mentioned about going back to the basic, right? So for us to really talk about the more mature discussion, we go to the basic of understanding the carbon footprint. So I think this is also something that we've been deliberating with our vendors and supply ecosystem. Do we know the kind of footprint, and do we have the MRV in place, monitoring, reporting, and verification of the GHG emissions, right? Not many. I would say for those vendor suppliers that are subjected to the Bursa requirements, they do it, but majority of the SMEs at the early stage of really doing the baselining. So for Petronas alone, I think when we declared our net zero carbon emissions aspiration, that was in November 2020, it took us 2 years to really get the numbers validated and verified by third party. And this requires the basic of carbon accounting to be in place, and people are being trained and skilled, right? And this similar kind of approach must be done if we are talking about, implementing or having RUPIN in the near future. We need to start now preparing all the companies and organizations to start having that baseline and MRV in place. So it doesn't come as a surprise, because it will take time to really have the GHG inventory and have that numbers validated before we can discuss about potentially having trading system or levy in place. So go back to the basic, I would say. That's how we bring the rhetoric or the framework into the ground and implementation stage.
So make it simplified, make people understand this.
And make it relevant to them.
Right.
Like, do you know what's your footprint, GHG scope 1 and scope 2, and how do you measure? Is the number in accordance to the GHG protocol requirements, and it's a number third party verified and validated. Go to the basic and making sure that, that's done first.
Thank you. Dr. Hartini, how do you think we can localize the SDGs better so everybody's on board?
Okay, maybe I'll respond a bit to Mr. Sayuti on the preparedness of the companies. We will have a monitoring period for about maybe 2 years. That is our plan for the company to prepare for the GHG accounting. So it's not that we say that we have to do it now, but there is a 2 years period, and we gather the information, the data from the company, because we also need to have a baseline for that for the exercise. So the other thing is back to the climate resilient. Actually, when we do any of the policy, we engage with the civil society, and we hope that the civil society will go back to the local communities and to deliver what we have discussed, and also what the government is doing at this point of time. So that is what we hope for the civil society. We engage because we already have the consultative panel and chaired by the YB minister. So we engage with all the civil society, and we hope that it's translated or cascaded to the local communities. And apart from that, also we also enhance public awareness by doing a recent, not so recent, webinar in March, titled Fenomena El Nino and Kesannya ke atas Kesihatan Awam. It drew 324 participants in Zoom and 1,100 views on Facebook. And like I mentioned, there's one webinar also on September 20th, 2024. Will address ke daya tahanan komuniti and adaptasi iklim di Malaysia, memahami dan mengurus kesan terhadap kumpulan rentan. So this is focus on vulnerable groups, and this is organized by NRES.
Dato', how do we talk about this in Sarawak region?
The Sarawak way, is it?
Sarawak way.
So as I mentioned just now, we have got the law already, which is the Environmental Bill or GHG Reduction Bill, 2023. And for the industries, actually we have enforced that law on the 1st of March this year. So when we announced, the industries were all shivering, But we we told them not to panic, because we are going to give them a grace period of about 3 to 5 years, and they can start reporting. Now, most of the heavy emitters are reporting, including the oil and gas industry, the cement, the steel, aluminium, and so on, aviation, and even transportation. They are reporting. And in Sarawak, we have a board, which is called the NREB, NREB, Natural Resources Environment Board. That is the equivalent to DOE in federal. So Sarawak, under our law, actually Sarawak was already a nation when we formed Malaysia in 1963, and we already had the laws on environment, which is called the NREO 1958, quite similar to OMO 1958. So this is NREO, Natural Resources Environment Ordinance 1958. And that's why in 1974, we formed our own NREB, which is a board. And now, NREB is one of my agencies under our ministry, besides Sarawak Energy and also Petros, and maybe other agencies which are dealing in hydrogen and so on. And the industries are reporting to NREB. Yeah? They find their own way. Whatever way, they have to report to NREB. And so now we have got the data, at least for the heavy emitters. And also just to share with you, next year we are going to launch the first GHG digital platform. Yeah, GHG digital platform. Meaning that anybody who wants to report or who wants to request or apply for their carbon credit permits, at the counter, they're already registered and then processed through the different departments and ministries back to us, verify the credits, verify the carbon emission, GHG emission, and that will be our own carbon registry. It's under Sarawak. But we can share our carbon registry with the federal government. So that is the way Sarawak is doing. Besides that, under NREB, we have got a lot of these public awareness programs. For example, they have got clubs in the schools. We have almost 1,600 schools, secondary and primary in Sarawak, and every school has got their own environmental club. Yeah, so they go through the clubs and they have competitions and so on. And also on conferences, Sarawak, I think you know, we have done so many international conferences. The Carbon Conference, International Hydrogen Conference. In November, this coming November, is going to be the Air Quality Conference. Please come over for those who are interested. And next year, there will be our International Energy Week in Sarawak, and at least 4 or 5 more international conferences in Sarawak. Thank you.
So you have to quickly book your tickets for that as well, right? I believe there's another question on the Sarawak Way, Dr. Hazland. I think I quickly saw that. There's a question about a bit more about sharing on how Sarawak is looking at CCUS. Yes. Would you like to share a bit more on that? Yes.
What is the question?
How is Sarawak looking at CCUS?
Oh, CCUS,
yes.
Yeah. I mentioned just now, I mean, CCUS will be probably one of the most accurate and effective way to reduce GHG, at least to reduce CO2 emission. You know? If we want to set the target of net zero by 2050, or at least 45% by 2030, there's no way we can use the trees. There's no way, because that is not a technical method. That is more of offsetting. And now there's a lot of greenwashing, a lot of fraud, because there's no law. So we have to look at the technical method. So CCUS is one of it. And as I mentioned just now, we have got the potential space, you know, so much and so much. And our revenue will be through the, for federal, will be probably through the import tax or export tax, because the carbon from the other countries will be stored in our depleted oil wells and saline aquifers. And of course, for Sarawak, our revenue will be from the storage fee. Yeah, storage fee, that will be per ton, and it is almost equivalent to the price of carbon. So you can imagine how much new revenue that both Malaysia and Sarawak is going to develop in the near future. Yeah, so that is CCUS. Our first injection will be in 2026 at the Kasawari project, together with between Petros and Petronas. And actually anybody can collaborate with Petros. Petros is the resource manager. We are the owner of the oil wells and so on. And any other companies like Exxon, Shell, or anybody can collaborate with Petros to embark in the CCUS industry. And there are 4 value chains in CCUS. One is the direct capture, which actually is the most expensive. And if Malaysia has got that technology, that would be very good, because the income, the highest revenue is from the capture, which is 70% of the whole value chain. And the rest is shipping of the liquefied CO2, injection of CO2, and storage of CO2. All those is 10%, 10%, 10%, right? So that's how it looks like. And anybody interested, you can try to look into it and study, or at least you can become one of the vendors or the downstream player in CCUS. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dato. Can we just have a look at the other question? Maybe we can scroll up a bit. Let's see what else has been asked. A bit more, maybe to the top. Let's see. Right to the top. Yes. Okay. So I think this is a question that many people ask often. How do we have better whole of government coordination, whole of nation coordination, right? So perhaps I could ask every panelist, in your opinion, what would be the best ways to create or maybe tweak existing governance structures in coordinating climate resilience efforts across the different sectors? Maybe Dr. Hatini, you would like to kick us off on this.
Okay, mitigation is global, but adaptation actually is localized. So it's good for, although we are planning to have the MINAP, but it is good if the states also have their own national adaptation plan, because the states knows better their place, how risk is their place. Adaptation also is currently happening, but we don't call it adaptation, like Tebatan Banjir and everything. That is also adaptation, and the government also has spent a lot of money to do the Tebatan Banjir. So that is in my opinion, it is kind of scattered also now, because we don't have a proper plan. It is like a troubleshooting when it's happened, and then we try to see, but we don't foresee it like 100 years forecast. There is the sea level rise and everything, but not so structured that how we the action plan that we are going to do. So with this national adaptation plan, we are looking at 5 sectors, including the food security and everything. So it will take some time for us to look at it at the national level. But like I said, I urge the state also to do their national to do their state adaptation plan that is more localized and more accurate to the state.
Yeah. Is there many states currently doing that?
I think Selangor is planning to do that, I think. And Penang is also having from, I think City is doing for Penang, I think for the adaptation fund, they got fund from the adaptation fund. So Sarawak is also planning to have one, is it? Sudah ada.
Sarawak, of course.
Maybe you can, maybe Sarawak can share the plan to us later.
Yeah, thank you very much. Like I mentioned just now, it's carrot and stick approach. Yeah, carrot and stick approach. Just to quote one example, when we were in Norway, we visited the Northern Lights project, CCUS. We also learned from the government of Norway on how they incentivize the usage of battery EV vehicles. Now, Norway is has got the highest number of battery EV vehicles in the world, which is about 75% of the vehicles are either battery EV or hydrogen FCEV. How did they do it in a short period of time, just in 4 years? The answer is they offered tax incentive, yeah? Meaning anybody driving a battery EV or hydrogen EV vehicle, they are given tax discounts, which is equivalent to the price of the battery. Thank you.
Straightforward, carrot and stick. Fahana.
Okay, so just a bit of a briefer. So MYD, we actually focus on climate diplomacy and climate policy. So it's a very niche field. And because of that, speaking from our experience, is that we realized that at the interministerial level, communication could be improved on. And so, and I think in a way where CSOs are involved, we, for MYD's case, we have tried to become the bridge between ministries to trying to convey how certain times certain climate issues are also would impact other ministries' portfolio. And so at the state level, what I recommend is for state governments to engage with their local CSOs, because those local CSOs actually engage with the local communities, even the indigenous communities in those areas. And hearing from those communities, because most often than not, they've kind of taken resilience into their own hands. They have solutions to an extent. They have knowledge about what they can do and what they cannot do. And to be fair, their voices need to be heard, and then they can actually communicate with the government, with their state government, and even teach state governments on implementation efforts, and even on what they need to be better prepared for the future of climate change, I guess.
I suppose it can come bottom up and also top down, right? Dr. Hartini mentioned that it's asset or site specific. So for companies, I think it is no regrets to do that physical risk assessment for your assets, respective asset. Identify which are assets at really high risk or extreme high risk, and develop the site-specific adaptation plan for it. That's from the bottom up. So of all the companies, all the corporates are doing that, then we have a good baseline data for Malaysia. And the top down coming from federal or the state, then it's easier for these companies to hook on or anchor on whatever they are doing to the national adaptation plan or the state level adaptation plan. So I'm encouraged by the development of Malaysia NAP. So hopefully this can better orchestrate all the efforts across many private sectors and call them adaptation. Because Farhana mentioned, like, community level, company level, they do efforts or activities, they may not call it adaptation at this juncture, right? So if you have better categorization or the way we cluster, then we can really develop a more cohesive and coherent adaptation plan, both bottom up and hook on to the top down guidance.
Thank you. So I see we've got about slightly more than 5 minutes, so this will be the last question for the panelists to wrap it up, right? I'd just like to pose a question. What, in your opinion, would be best future fit strategies that we can take as a country, right, to ensure that we always prosper in a low carbon economy, right? What would be your wish list, right? So we'll go from Dr. Hartini to one. You'll be last because as the Rakan strategic for this National Sdg Summit, you can close off our panel. Dr. Hartini, what would that be?
I think engagement is very important for us to do at. I'm talking about federal level. Yeah, engagement with all levels of society or stakeholders, different stakeholders, because climate change is cross-sectoral. At NRES, for example, we are not doing any mitigation, big mitigation. Of course, MGT is doing some kind of green technologies, but the mitigation effort is mostly done by KE, under Petronas is under KE, and also Petra. And for example, food security is under KPKM. And that is adaptation. And for cities, we also have low carbon cities, but we need to engage PBTs and local communities. So for us, wherever we do any new policy, we engage. That is the most important, so that it's a whole of nation approach, so everybody is being heard. Of course, the government will do the decision, but we hear from everybody that, and we can take into the consideration any inputs that is valuable to us.
Thank you, Dr. Hartini. Maybe Dr. Hazland?
For Sarawak, again, straightforward. We capitalize on our strength. Yeah, our strength, as I mentioned just now, our huge land mass, our forests, our rivers, our hydroelectric power, our solar, and so on, our hydrogen, our leadership, our political stability, and the way we work is no nonsense. We go straight to the point, and I just would like to share you the basis is, one of the policies is this, which is the green economy policy, and it is based on what do you call it? Low carbon economy on the 8 pillars and 31 strategies. If you would like me to delve into the 31 strategies, you need to give me another 3 hours. So to wrap it up, I will go to SDG 17, number 17, which is partnership to achieve the goal. I think that is what our topic for the day is all about. We need to collaborate from all levels of society and also in this part of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, YB. So it's collaboration across all levels, and also I like that, no nonsense, roll up the sleeve and let's get it done, right? Fahada.
We'll need short, medium, and even long-term strategies and the consequences of these strategies, which include financing and capacity. And I know that climate change is being addressed at the international level, but at the international level, because it's multilateral, it takes years, even decades. So I think some of the discussions are even older than me. So I think regardless of the outcome of those discussions, Malaysia should try to do what it can in-house. And that includes, short to long-term planning.
You have to have short and long-term strategic planning on this, right? So Mr. Wan Sayuti, to close off our panel, what is your thoughts?
For me, action is important. We are not short of policy or framework or guideline. What we need now is really the how-to, driving the actions on the ground, and how do we work together, whole of nation approach from the federal, the state, private sector, to really translate those framework into actions. Like Nike said, just do it, right? And then the second point is on opportunities. When we think about climate resilience, what comes to mind is risk. But we also need to shift that to opportunities. Malaysia has the potential to be the regional CCS hub, right? The biggest CCS project, Kasawari, when it comes online 2026. Nature-based solution, we have a lot to offer. Hydrogen also potentially can be the biggest in this part of the world. So think about opportunities that will drive the investments and the financing that comes with climate resilience. Thank you.
Thank you. So hearing from panelists, I think the big conclusion is that, when it comes to climate action, I think Malaysia and we Malaysians can definitely punch above our weight and can show the world that we can be climate leaders as well. So with that, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a round of applause for our fantastic panel today. Thank you also for the questions and participating. And keep in touch. Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Farouz, for moderating that discussion. Let's have a quick photograph with all our panelists and moderator for moving on to our next keynote. For those who have just joined us, welcome. Thank you for being a part of day 2. Do kindly scan this QR code here on your lanyards for information on the agenda for the day, especially the breakout sessions which will be happening after lunch. So do take note of the various speakers and topics that we will be discussing as we get ready for our next keynote presentation. Once again, thank you to our panel, rounding up that discussion on climate. We started off with climate. We're moving into communities.